Good afternoon. I'm Trian Zhang. Today my presentation is about can China as method give space for different cultures to be seen, heard, and discussed through a second language. Before I proceed, I would like to briefly introduce my background. I work as a primary school language teacher, teaching Chinese language to primary school students in the last 8 years. During this time, my classroom is also my PhD research fieldwork. Doing research and teaching at the same time, I'd love to share some of my observations and how these observations lead me into the proposal of China as method to think about Australian identity, cultural diversity, and the reconciliation with the First Nations. In my teaching, I found out that many Australian students respond to the question, what is China, with answers such as Chinese food, pandas, dragons, kung fu, Jackie Chan, or dumplings, Great Wall of China, and many things they have that made in China. Australian students, they use their daily life experiences to understand what China is. Apart from that, Australian students, they also use their cultural or linguistic or ethnic backgrounds to understand China, Chinese language and culture. For instance, in my teaching, during the Chinese New Year, we normally will talk about the red envelope. This is the time Australian students will tell me that in their culture, during the New Year time or Christmas, their parents will also give them some pocket money. As a teacher, I also notice it is so natural for me to link others' culture when I teach Chinese language. For instance, when I teach students about Chinese money, I talk about Chairman Mao on Chinese yuan and Queen Elizabeth on Australian notes. I also ask students to talk about their parents' country's currency. So by comparing Chinese yuan, Australian dollars, and their parents' cultures, students not only learn Chinese culture, they also learn about Australian culture and their parents, their ethical culture. It is always two ways of a communication between teachers and students. I classified them as 4 ways of knowledge flow in classroom. These are successful knowledge flow with confusion, knowledge flow with resistance, and unbalanced knowledge flow. So I will use the following example to demonstrate what do I mean. First one, such as a student come to me saying, my mom bought me this toy. It is made in China. So comments like this, so I clarified them as a successful knowledge flow. So for example, Chinese food, kung fu, or lanterns. So these are cultural elements that Australian students integrate them in their daily life. So I regard them as a successful knowledge flow. Comments like, is this right? Is this right? There's a lot of pollution in China. This kind of a confusion leads to a cultural clarification. So I will help my students to clarify what is going on in China. Or sometimes children get confused about if Chairman Mao on the Chinese notes are king of China. So that's the time I help students to clarify their understanding about China. I call this knowledge flow as knowledge flow with confusion. I also experience knowledge flow with resistance. For instance, when I'm in the middle of teaching, I have students come to me saying, this Chinese dragon, you are talking about dragon, it is against my religion. I also experienced this situation when I did Chinese cooking, making dumplings with my students, because they think making dumplings is also a religious event that they cannot get themselves involved because it is against their religion. So I call this as knowledge flow with resistance. So in between knowledge flow with confusion and knowledge flow with resistance, these are the moments that as a teacher I try to intervene with clarifications. However, from all these patterns of knowledge flow, we can clearly see a pattern of unbalanced knowledge flow between China, the peripheral society, and Australian society, the mainstream Euro-American metropolitan cities or societies. So this unbalanced knowledge flow revealed that China, not only China is very limited for Australian students to learn, they also reveal the limited understanding about Australian students' ethnic cultural backgrounds. Obviously, Australian students' way of understanding China from different culture, linguistic, social, and economic backgrounds make China a hybrid assemblage. What I mean about China as a hybrid assemblage, it means in the Australian context, China is not a stable entity or geographically out there, culturally separated from here in Australia. China as a hybrid assemblage means China is not out there far away from Australia. It is in here in Australia. China in the Australian context is experienced, tested, judged, and contested in today's globalized digital Australian society. China is a fragmented, inconsistent, and episodic personal experiences, stereotyped and challenged. China in the Australian context is complex and fluid, confusing, and sometimes contradictory. From the research question of what is China to find out that China as a hybrid assemblage in the Australian context, I also found out that in learning Chinese language and culture, China becomes a reference point to many different cultures and languages. It is from these findings that I suggest that China can be a method to contribute to Australian identity, cultural diversity, and reconciliation with the First Nations. In the following, I'd love to share one of the teaching stories happened in my classroom. It is related to how we use Aboriginal culture to understand Chinese character Hong. In my school, we have some Aboriginal students. Once, in the middle of teaching Chinese characters, Hong, the rainbow, I asked these questions. What does the left part of this character mean? This is after I explained to them about the meaning of Chinese characters. So one of the students answered, it looks like a snake. I said, how about the other side? And one of the students, she's Aboriginal kids, she said, it means rainbow. And then she told me that in the Aboriginal culture, they have a story about a rainbow snake. And in fact, this rainbow snake is exactly like the original meaning of Chinese character Hong. China as a method unsettles the imbalanced knowledge flow between peripheral and metropole societies and between China and other Asian countries in today's globalized world. China as a method gives space for young learners to see culture others. It also helps young learners not only differentiate culture stereotypes, but also understand and respect cultural differences and minimize or eliminate racism in Australia. Subsequently, fostering intercultural understanding and assisting the global education from the perspective of a second language program. China as a method can be Japan as method or Indonesia as method because we want to teach young people to develop an attitude to multicultural society without China. We want to build Australian identity and contribute to Australian cultural diversity and to reconciliate with the First Nations through learning a second language. Thank you for watching. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to contact me through the following emails. Goodbye.